Some say being a doctor means believing you can fight off despair. But no one talks about what it feels like to stand between life and death for someone you love, while your entire family stays silent, waiting for you to fail. My name is Eden, 36 years old, neurosurgeon. I live in Providence, Rhode Island, in an apartment where the heater rattles through winter nights. I'm the eldest of 3, and am almost always the name that quietly disappears from every conversation. 3 weeks ago, I saved my sister's life after a cerebral artery rupture caused by an accident. But when the nurse told my mother I was the lead surgeon, she just blinked and turned away, like she must have misheard. And that no longer surprised me. If you've ever had to choose between dignity and family, leave a comment, hit like, share this story, and follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next. The next morning, I returned to the hospital on time, as usual. White coat pressed, name badge catching the hallway light. The security guard nodded at me, but his eyes only paused for a second, just long enough to confirm I wasn't a patient. On paper, I came back to oversee critical postoperative care. In truth, I just needed to know Chloe was still breathing. She was lying in the ICU, eyes closed, forehead covered in electrode pads. The monitor showed a steady, bouncing heart rate. I stood outside the glass, arms crossed, chin tilted slightly. If I walked in, she probably wouldn't recognize me. That feeling was familiar. I asked not to be assigned directly to the case. The chart said to avoid conflict of interest, but the real reason? I didn't know who I was in that room. A sister? A surgeon? Or just a stranger with the same last name? At 9:43 a.m., I heard the familiar rhythm of heels coming down the hallway. My mother, Margaret, followed by my father, Richard, and my younger brother, Owen. They walked into the ICU like a model family from a healthcare brochure. Posture straight, faces just tense enough, voices kept low and appropriate. I pressed myself against the left wall of glass, a few feet away, close enough to see everything, far enough not to be seen. Mom leaned over Chloe's bed, holding her hand in both of hers like she was trying to trap whatever warmth was left. "Sweetheart. It's okay. You're okay," she whispered. Owen stood beside her, shoulders slightly hunched like he was bracing for a fall. Dad spoke to the nurse, his voice calm and distant, his go-to tone, when he didn't want to admit fear. Then Mom turned and asked, "Who was the lead surgeon? I just want to thank whoever saved our daughter." The nurse glanced at the surgical assignment board, hesitated. I saw her glance toward the glass. I didn't nod, didn't blink, didn't move. A younger nurse, probably just off shift, spoke up. "Dr. Rao, the lead surgeon, is her sister." The words landed like a glass falling on tile. Didn't shatter, but made a noise no one could pretend not to hear. My mother froze. My father turned toward her, face pale. Owen, he was the only one who turned his head. His eyes met mine through the glass. Then he looked down. I didn't wait. I walked away. Not fast, not hiding. Just walking. Because I knew any explanation, if it came at all, would arrive long after I'd gone. Out in the hospital courtyard, the air was crisp. The scent of cafeteria coffee drifted in and out with the breeze. I sat on a wooden bench, paper cup warm in my hands. When they found me, I was already there. Mom sat beside me on the left. She didn't touch me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice low like wind brushing past a window. I looked her in the eye. "Because if you had known, you would have asked for someone else." She opened her mouth, ready to object. But no words came. I turned away. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't have to be spoken aloud. Sometimes, survival is enough. I thought that was the climax. I was wrong. I didn't realize that was just the beginning. I didn't return to the hospital the next day. My schedule had been rearranged to avoid unnecessary interaction with patient relatives. I didn't object. Every time I passed the ICU and saw my mother leaning over Chloe's bed, it felt like walking past a scene in a story I had no permission to be part of. Instead, I stayed at my apartment in the quiet west side of Providence. The balcony looked out over maple trees starting to shed their leaves. November felt colder than usual. The smell of printer ink from the downstairs library drifted up through the afternoons. I poured hot water, held the ceramic cup between both hands. Stillness. And that's when the old memories started slipping in. My family wasn't broken. Not in the obvious ways. No shouting, no violence. We were the kind of family that laughed loud at dinner, but never at the same jokes. My mother, Margaret, was an elementary school teacher. She loved crafts, antique flower vases, and a very selective kind of gentleness. My father, Richard, was an accountant. He believed in structure, in never letting emotion override logic. Chloe was born when I was 8. Blonde hair, blue eyes that sparkled like string lights. People said her smile softened rooms. And it did. Even in preschool, she knew how to win people over, even after spilling ink all over my art project. I used to think if I got better grades, they'd notice. So I studied, memorized the periodic table at 10, learned human anatomy through plastic models while Chloe was still drawing three-legged cats. I applied to an advanced science program, got the acceptance letter, brought it home. Mom smiled and said, "And will you still have time to practice piano?" Not criticism, just enough to settle in my chest for days. When I was 12, I made a clay model of a human heart. It wasn't pretty, but it was accurate. I left it on the kitchen counter, only to find it the next morning shoved aside to make room for Chloe's freshly baked cookies. "Whose is this?" Mom asked. "Mine," I said, scrubbing dishes. "What is it?" "A heart," I answered. "A real one. With vessels." She pressed her lips together. "You should try making something gentler." I said nothing. I never made another model after that. At every parent-teacher meeting, Mom bragged about Chloe. "She's in ballet." Her poem got read to the class. And me? When teachers asked about me, she'd smile faintly and say, "Eden, she's into different things." I never blamed Chloe. She didn't do anything wrong. But over time, I learned not to expect anyone to stand beside me. I got used to not having my photo in the hallway frames. Got used to being introduced as Chloe's sister, not my daughter. When I got into Brown, right here, in Providence, we went out to dinner. Chloe talked about being picked for a solo in the holiday concert. Everyone focused on that. No one asked what major I chose or which dorm I'd live in. I remember holding my plate of pasta, watching the cheese stretch too far, and wondering why no one said, "Congratulations." I thought growing up would change things. But when you're raised in a house where people think you're too rigid, too clinical, you learn to wear logic like armor, even when it squeezes the air out of your ribs. I got up from the kitchen table, walked onto the balcony. Dry leaves crunched under my feet. I took a sip of water, gone cold long ago. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Dad, just one line. "Chloe's stable. Your mom's planning dinner Sunday, if you're not too busy." No thank you. No mention of the surgery. I didn't reply. Just deleted the message. I thought I'd gotten used to it. Then someone said my name like it still meant something. Friday, 5:42 p.m. I had exactly 18 minutes left in my shift at South Providence Hospital. The sky outside had turned a deep purple, reflected in the surgery room windows speckled with rain. I was jotting down the final notes in a post-op patient's chart when the pager clipped to my coat let out a dry buzz. A familiar string of numbers appeared, emergency code from the control center. I picked up the nearest landline, dialed the internal number. "Dr. Rowe," I said, pen still in hand. A woman's voice on the other end, fast and urgent. "We have an emergency transfer from Cranston. Female, 33 years old, unconscious, suspected brain trauma from a traffic accident. GCS is 7. They don't have the capability to intervene. We need a neurosurgeon now. Can you take the case?" I glanced at the clock. 5:45. Closed my eyes for a second, just long enough to gather my focus. "Send me the digital records. I'll take it." 1 minute later, The physician dashboard blinked. New file received. I opened it. The patient's full name was at the top. Chloe Rao. My finger froze on the mouse. I didn't blink. The world around me tightened, like it was pressed behind a pane of frozen glass. Chloe, my sister. I read the diagnosis mechanically. Left side impact. Lost consciousness at the scene. Slow pupil response. Initial CT scan showed bleeding around the brainstem. Severe case. I didn't say a word. I wasn't allowed to. The surgical team didn't know the relationship between me and the patient, and I intended to keep it that way. The surgery was scheduled less than 40 minutes later. I stepped into the locker room, quietly removed my name badge from the white coat, replaced it with blue surgical scrubs, mask, face shield, gloves. I looked at myself in the mirror. Behind the shield, a pair of eyes stared straight ahead, refusing to blink. I shoved everything else into the locker and slammed it shut. The operation began at 6:39 p.m. When they wheeled Chloe in, I gave only a brief glance, her forehead shaved, skin pale, facial muscles twitching faintly. I didn't think about old photos, didn't think about childhood hugs. I locked all of that behind my neck, keeping only steady hands and cold eyes. "Dr. Rowe, are you ready?" the technician asked. I'm leading. Began prepping the tools. The drill whirred to life, cutting through the silence like a warning. The entire operating room fell still. 7 hours later, we cleared the hemorrhage, relieved pressure on the compressed brain tissue, monitored blood pressure, adjusted intracranial pressure, and stitched the wound with millimeter-level precision. When I placed the final suture, my hand trembled. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. Or maybe because I finally allowed myself to remember. One evening, when I was 8, Chloe broke Mom's porcelain night lamp. I took the blame. Not out of courage, but because I couldn't stand to see Mom cry. When she asked me why, I said, because I'm the older sister. Few days later, she never brought it up again. No reward, no hug. I didn't need one. Or at least, I thought I didn't. I left the OR at 2:10 a.m. The hallway lights were a soft yellow glow. I pulled off my gloves, my mask, shoved them into the biohazard bin, then walked to the parking lot, speaking to no one. I sat in the car, engine off, hands on the wheel. No tears. Just a hollow feeling, like I'd placed my heart in someone else's chest and forgotten my own on the operating table. I had saved Chloe, but I knew this wouldn't stay in the OR. A few days later, the first whispers started. From the last people I expected. I arrived at the hospital early on Monday morning, 2 days after the surgery. Fog clung to my windshield, blurring the plates of the car ahead. My hands were still sore from holding the scalpel for 7 hours, but I didn't ask for time off. Silence. I didn't want to be home with the silence. Chloe had been moved to the quiet ICU wing, where the light stayed dim and heart monitors replaced wall clocks. I walked down the corridor, clipboard in hand like a makeshift shield. The head nurse greeted me with a polite look. "Patient Rowe is more stable now," she said, not noticing anything special about the last name. She woke up briefly, asked for water, then fell back asleep. I nodded lightly, eyes fixed on room 214. "I'd like to monitor the recovery remotely. I won't enter the room." The nurse asked, "Would you prefer updates via internal system or email?" "Email," I answered. "I don't need my name attached to the patient file." She nodded, didn't press. I stood behind the glass and watched. Chloe was still asleep, a small bandage on her forehead, IV lines running down her arms. From that distance, she looked like the middle school kid she once was, curled up on the couch after cartoons, cookie crumbs on her lip. Only this time, no one covered her with a blanket. I left before my mother arrived. But that afternoon, the first hospital system email came in. Chloe was improving. The intensivist had written, "Brief alertness, maintain eye contact, no motor impairment." No mention of me. Didn't need one. The next day, a secretary from administration forwarded me an email invite. A thank you event for the medical team who helped save Chloe Rowe. Scheduled for Saturday, hosted in the South Wing, the one used for award ceremonies and graduations. It wasn't from my mother. Not from my brother. Just HR following procedure. I clicked accept, then shut my laptop. Felt no different than confirming a vaccination appointment. Saturday, I picked a gray blazer that had hung untouched in my closet, meant for lectures or funerals. Not because I lacked prettier options, but because it made me feel far enough. The hall was decorated with blue and white balloons, white tablecloths, and trays of slowly cooling food under warmers. A sign near the door read, "Thank you for saving Chloe." I stepped in, picked up a pale lemonade, stood at the edge of the room like I was waiting for someone. No one looked at me. No one pointed and said, "That's her." I didn't introduce myself either. Midway through, my mother stood to speak. Beige coat, a scarf with soft floral print. Her voice was steady and clear, just like the PTA meetings I remembered. Our family is deeply grateful to the doctors, nurses, and staff who cared for Chloe. Thanks to you, she's still smiling. I didn't smile. The lemonade in my hand grew colder with every word. We don't know each name, but this gratitude will never fade. I didn't expect to be named. But hearing that, I knew. They'd go on, not knowing. The woman beside me, an older nurse, leaned in and whispered, "That's strange. I thought you were the one who did the surgery." I whispered back, "You're not wrong, but some people see, others don't." Then I left through the side exit, where no one had to watch me go. On the drive home, the wind slapped the car windows, stirring leaves around the tires. I stopped at a red light. The radio was playing a segment about a state-level medical award. I didn't catch the details. My eyes had shifted to the phone lighting up on the passenger seat. A new email. From the Rhode Island Board of Surgery. Subject line read only 4 words. "Congratulations, Dr. Rowe." I didn't smile. But this time, I didn't lower my head. I didn't know what was more exhausting. 8 hours of surgery? Or standing in a room full of familiar faces, pretending I didn't exist. After leaving the hospital reception, I returned to my apartment on the west side. The lights had turned on automatically according to the preset timer. On the dining table, the invitation from the surgical board still sat untouched. I hadn't opened it. Not because I didn't care, but because I still had the habit of waiting to see if anyone else would mention the news first. No one did. 3 days later, I got a call from Ethan. "Eden?" My younger brother's voice hesitated. "Are you free Sunday night? Mom is planning a dinner for Chloe, sort of a survived and celebrated thing." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, then answered. "I thought everyone already celebrated at the hospital." Ethan went silent for a few seconds. "Can you come? I mean, not for them, for Chloe." I didn't respond right away. "I'll check my schedule," I said, then hung up. Sunday night I stood in front of the mirror, choosing a shirt that wasn't too bold, but not too pale either. At the last minute, I brushed my hair again and removed the name badge still clipped to my coat pocket. I didn't want to bring a title into a house where titles had never earned me respect. When I stepped into the house in Cranston where I grew up, a familiar scent rushed in, half apple pie, half cheap-scented candle. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, her hair still thin after surgery, but her eyes were brighter than I remembered. My mother was placing salad dishes on the table, and my father was carving roast meat, shoulders slightly slumped the way he always was when he didn't want to get involved emotionally. I entered the dining room. No one said anything immediately. No awkwardness, no excitement. It felt like I was a food delivery worker who arrived on time. "Hi," Chloe said softly, making eye contact for less than a second before looking away. "Hi," I replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down. During dinner, every conversation centered around Chloe's recovery. How nice the physical therapist was, how the soup Mom made was just the right amount of salt, making everyone nod in agreement. Not a single question was directed at me. No one mentioned the call at 5:42 p.m. or anything that happened between then and the next morning. When dessert was served, my mother placed a hand on Chloe's shoulder. "She's stronger than I thought." I looked at the slice of pie on my plate, the knife cut clean, but no one offered me any. As I got up to leave, Ethan followed me to the back porch. The outside air was so cold my palms recoiled when I touched the wooden railing. "I know you're upset," Ethan said. "But, thank you." I didn't look at him. "No need to thank me," I said. "I didn't do it for praise. I did it because it was right." "I understand," Ethan's voice lowered. "But, you still deserve to be acknowledged." I turned back, looked him in the eye. "That's not something that should come from you, and it doesn't need to anymore." He nodded slightly, like someone who understood he no longer had a role in this ending. I left the porch, got in the car, placed my hands on the steering wheel. When I opened my phone to check the news, a headline popped up at the top. "Female doctor hides identity, saves her own sister, the untold story." No name mentioned, but the blurred photo beneath it was from my personnel file. I thought it was all over. But it turned out the thing I had hidden most was slowly surfacing from places I didn't expect. The story of the unnamed surgeon's sister was being shared more than I thought. Not on major platforms, but within the hospital intranet, the alumni group chats, the inner circles, where I'd always worked silently, like a reliable screw in a large machine. I kept my usual rhythm: up before 6, work till night, home, face wash, and not letting any emotion cross the hallway between the front door and the bedroom. Until Wednesday morning, when I received a text from Chloe. "Meredith, I heard you don't want to see me. I understand if that's true. But if there's even a small space left to talk. I'm at Bean and Birch, near Hope Bridge, 1 p.m. I folded my phone, looked at the calendar on the fridge. No surgeries today, no meetings. No one waiting for me to say start counting. I put on my long coat and stepped outside. The air was damp and the wind tossed yellow leaves onto the street. Bean and Birch sat inside an old brick house with a wooden sign nailed crudely, like someone had put it up half asleep. Chloe was sitting in the corner, stirring her coffee until the foam disappeared. Her hair was still thin, her hairline visibly stuck to her forehead. When she saw me, she stood up, then sat back down. And I sat across from her. It didn't feel like distance. It felt like sitting with someone who once knew me but no longer remembered exactly how I used to laugh. "I don't know where to start," Chloe said, eyes still fixed on her cup. "Just start." She took a slow breath. "Do you remember when I fell down the stairs at 6? My knee was bleeding. You were the first to run over. You washed the wound with cold water, put on a bandage, and sat beside me until I stopped crying." I nodded slightly. "You asked for a cookie afterward." Chloe let out a small laugh. "Yeah, I even said you'd make a good nurse." I stayed quiet. Suddenly that memory wasn't blurry anymore. I remembered the smell of her sweat mixed with toothpaste as she hugged me with full trust. "But then Mom walked in," she continued. "She yelled at you. Said, 'Don't pretend to be a doctor.' I didn't understand then. Now, I do." She looked up. Her eyes weren't trying to win me over. They were unlocking a door. "I used to think you didn't love me. I told my friends you were cold, didn't care. I'm sorry, really. If you've ever been silenced because you weren't believed, or blamed just for telling the truth, leave a comment. Share this story if you believe someone out there needs to hear it." I didn't respond immediately. I looked at the napkin Chloe was twisting in her hand, her fingertips trembling, not ready for an answer. "I'm not angry that you didn't know," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "I'm angry that you never asked." Chloe bit her lip, nodding like someone who had long expected that reply. "Do you hate Mom?" she asked. I looked out the window. An elderly couple was crossing the street, hand in hand, like no wind could pull them apart. "No," I said. "But I've stopped waiting for her to understand." Chloe didn't reply. I didn't argue. Didn't cry. We sat there for nearly another hour, not saying anything else. But the space between us didn't feel so cold anymore. As I stood up to leave, she said softly, "I don't know what to do to make up for it." A placed my hand on the table. Don't make up for anything. Just don't forget again. I wasn't expecting anything in return. But Chloe did something I hadn't seen coming. Grandfather's memorial was held at Fisher and Dawson Funeral Home, a red brick building at the end of North Main Street, where old family photos hung in gold-trimmed wooden frames. Not a place I wanted to return to, but the one he once said, "If anyone's strong enough to stand in that room without needing a guide, it's you." I arrived early, as usual. A long wool coat down to my knees, clean black shoes, and my doctor's badge left in the car. In my hand was a folded piece of paper, still bearing Grandpa's handwritten underline, the last line slightly tilted. "Kindness is not weakness, it's your compass." The memorial room was decorated with white lilies and family photos. On the display table, I saw 3 large framed pictures. One of Chloe in high school, the second of Ethan in his graduation gown, and the last of the 3 of us as children. I was in the middle of that photo, but half of my face was blocked by the edge of the frame. Someone walked by and asked, "Who's the girl in the middle? A cousin?" My mother, Margaret, answered without hesitation, "A distant relative." I didn't turn around. I just stepped back a few paces, like my body instinctively needed space to breathe. Ethan caught my eye and started to approach, but his wife gently placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. A small gesture, but enough for me to understand. Some people don't speak up, not because they don't want to, but because they've chosen the easier side. When it was Mom's turn to speak, she stood straight, voice clear and steady. My father was a man of principles, and he always put family first. He taught us love, patience, and how to support one another. I heard that sentence like someone reading the wrong area code, but still wanting to believe it was right. Chloe stood behind her. She didn't speak, just nodded slightly whenever Mom paused. When Mom finished with, "Family is something you never let go of," I saw Chloe lower her head. And I stood up. No one called on me, no one invited me to speak. But no one stopped me. I stepped forward, standing between 2 white floral arrangements. I looked down at the paper in my hand, folded it, and placed it in my coat pocket. "I'm Eden, granddaughter of the man in that photo. And I'm not here to speak about loss. I want to talk about something my grandfather once told me. That kindness is not endurance." No one interrupted, no applause. I've sat through birthdays where no one said my name. Received awards no one at home ever asked about. Worked myself to exhaustion to save lives, including those of blood relatives. Only to remain the forgotten one in every retelling. I saw some people glance at my mother. Her face was carved in stone. Not annoyed, not surprised, just the emptiness of habit. I'm not asking for pity. I'm not speaking to reclaim anything. I'm here to say, being forgotten doesn't mean being unworthy of mention. Bowed slightly, stepped away. No applause. No one called me back. But as I walked past the row of seats, Uncle Robert, Grandpa's younger brother, stood up. He took the microphone. His voice was raspy, but clear. "I just want to thank Eden. Not because she's a doctor, but because she stood up here. Something many in this family haven't had the courage to do." No one said anything, but I heard the quiet clink of a water glass being set on the table, like an unspoken acknowledgement. I left without looking back, but my words remained. The call came at 4:27 p.m., just as I was preparing to teach a dissection lab for second-year med students at Providence College. Unknown number, but I picked up out of habit. "Eden?" My mother's voice. Dry, slow, like a cassette tape being replayed. "Chloe just took me to get checked. The doctor said there are some irregularities with my heart. They said a procedure might be needed." I leaned against the whiteboard, one hand holding a marker, my mind still on the class I was about to lead. "What exactly is your condition?" "Not sure yet. They need to do more ultrasounds and an EKG." Her voice faded, then returned. "Awkward now. If you're not busy, I'd be okay if you came. Not, I need you. Not, can you help me? Just explain if you're not busy." I looked at the clock. Class started in 10 minutes. Okay, send me the hospital address. I asked the lead professor to excuse me from that session. No explanation, just said, I need to go to the hospital. No one asked why. My mother lay alone in the cardiology waiting room. The dim, white light washed her face like it was brushed with a thin layer of powder. No flowers. No one else. Just her and the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, like the old clock at home. I sat in the chair beside her bed. Didn't ask anything. I just waited. She turned to look at me. Her eyes weren't sharp like usual, just hollow. About what you said at the memorial, she began. I'm not sorry. I wasn't waiting for an apology, I replied, eyes fixed on the flaking paint near the window. A silence stretched endlessly. Then she said, You're like your father. I tilted my head slightly. She hadn't mentioned him in years. He died when I was 14, a rushed funeral. The emptiness lingered for years. In what way? I asked. The way you look at people, that quiet way that still makes them see themselves. She sighed. Every time I looked at you, I saw a part of myself I didn't know how to face. So I avoided you. I gripped the corner of the blanket, gently. Did you ever love me? She stared at me for a long time, then turned toward the wall. I don't know. I used to think if I praised you too much, you'd fly away. I wasn't ready to be left that early. I nodded slowly. Well, I flew away, but not because of praise. Because I couldn't breathe. She didn't respond. And I didn't press her. I just placed my hand on the edge of the bed. I didn't touch her. Just made sure she knew I was there. If that's all you can say, I accept it. Not because I was healed, but because I didn't want what never came to keep controlling what I choose next. When I left the hospital, it was already dark. Chloe was waiting near the elevator. She raised her phone, as if to say something, then lowered it. You okay? She asked. Don't know, I replied, but at least it's not an open wound anymore. We didn't say anything else. But when the elevator doors opened, I didn't step in right away. I turned to Chloe. You can pause if you're tired, but I'm going to keep walking. She nodded. Didn't try to stop me, and didn't turn away either. I thought that was the end. But then, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. It arrived Monday morning, tucked between ads and fundraising invites from the old med school. No return address. Just familiar slanted handwriting. Dr. Eden Rowe. No capitals. No formality. Almost. Careful. I held it between two fingers, like gripping too tightly might make it disappear. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee, fed the cat, watered the plants, then sat at the kitchen table and opened it with the small blade I use for manuscript trimming. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a blurred color photo, and a small card. The photo was taken on a phone, Chloe in a hospital gown, IV still attached, holding hands with someone in a blue lab coat. The other hand gently rested on her shoulder. The face was out of frame. But I knew exactly who it was. It was me. I remember that moment. About a minute after surgery, while the nurse was wheeling the bed into recovery, and I stepped out of the operating room, just as Chloe was slowly waking, and instinctively grabbed my hand. I didn't say anything then, just paused for a beat, then let go before anyone could notice. The card enclosed had only a few lines. Eden, I told them, all three, and Mom, that you don't need a title to do what's right. They didn't know what to say, but I did. I'm proud to be your sister. Chloe. I folded the card and placed it on the photo. I didn't cry. But my fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper, the way people try to hold on to warmth from a handshake that came too late. I sat in silence for a moment, then stood up, took the old frame that once held my Johns Hopkins diploma, removed the certificate, and replaced it with the photo from the letter. I placed it on the bookshelf, not among medals or awards, but right where I pass by after every workday. There, it doesn't need a spotlight. Just my own eyes. That afternoon, I arrived at the college earlier than usual. I took a walk down the hallway lined with student class portraits, stopped at a blank wall near the end of the corridor. Then I knocked on the dean's office door. "I have a proposal," I said as I stepped in. "We could host a talk for med students, not about technique, but about the ability to choose what's right, even when no one's watching." "I want to share a story." The dean nodded slowly. "If you're the one telling it, I believe they'll listen." That night, as I walked along Roger Williams Lake, a light drizzle began to fall. I pulled up my collar, walking slower than usual. Not because I was tired, but because I no longer needed to rush to prove anything. In my mailbox at home, there was another slip of paper, no envelope. A handwritten line. "I'm thinking about what you said. I don't know how to respond yet, but I'm listening." No signature, but the slightly tilted thinking told me it was from her. I held the note, folded it in half, and slipped it into the back left pocket of my wallet, the one that once held my first medical license. I thought I'd grown used to the emptiness. But this time, it felt like something was slowly filling in. 6 months after that call from Mom, I was no longer head of trauma surgery. I didn't leave from burnout. I didn't quit the field. I just chose to walk away from a place where success always demanded proof, usually in blood, or in the silence of my own voice. I accepted an offer to teach part-time at a community college in Pawtucket. No gold nameplate, no double glass office. Just a whiteboard, 28 wooden chairs, and a class mostly made up of women, many of them former night shift nurses, single moms, elder care aides. On the first day, I didn't talk about anatomy or cranial pressure. I wrote on the board, "Who here has been told by someone they trusted, 'You're not good enough'?" More than half the class raised their hands. I raised mine too. "We'll start from there." I taught them not just how to hold a scalpel, but how to stand tall when someone doubts you. I showed them how to trace a suture line, but reminded them to write their own names on the OR board, even when no one calls them aloud. One weekend afternoon, I stopped at a small leather shop in Federal Hill. On the shelf was a pair of handcrafted surgical gloves, stitched with fine gray thread. The shopkeeper asked, "Planning to operate with these?" I shook my head and smiled. To teach someone how to heal. When I got home, I replaced the graduation frame with the photo of Chloe holding my hand. Right beneath it, I added a small note. "No applause needed, just don't turn away." That night, I stood by the window looking down at the street where Chloe and I once sat at the old cafe. The crowds moved as they always did. But I was different. Not taller, not stronger, just no longer looking down. And don't know where you're listening from, maybe in the car, before bed, or on a day when you needed a story to remind you to stand back up. Tell me, where are you listening from? And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to follow the channel. The next story might be the one you didn't know you needed. I still don't know what makes someone remembered, whether it's achievement or absence. But I do know this. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the strongest way we hold on to ourselves. Eden's story isn't just about reclaiming her place in the family. It's a quiet but powerful reminder for those who've been told they're too cold or too rational to be loved. In real life, so many people are doing the right thing quietly, sacrificing without needing praise and being forgotten for it. Eden shows us that you don't need anyone's validation to have worth. As long as you don't turn your back on yourself, the light you carry is already enough.